Hi, I'm Pig, and welcome to our by the TLDR News Discord server. Here we question the community to find out their takes on a wide range of topics chosen on Discord by the community. Or that's the plan, anyway, if this goes well. Um, Today's topic is what was it like growing up in the aftermath of the Troubles in Northern Ireland? And I'd like to welcome Joel, or Mr. Keys,
Yeah,
to the stage. Welcome, and thank you for coming on.
thank you very
So
much for having me.
yeah, it's a pleasure. It really is. So I feel as if we're quite lucky. For those of you that don't know, Joel has been interviewed by news agency after news agency, and he came on saying, "Do you want to interview with me?" And we were like, "Yes, yes, get an interview," but it hasn't happened. So we are taking things into our own hands, and we are having a go. But anyway, that is how this came about, and a bit of a background. But yeah, I'm really interested in this topic because this is I grew up in Britain, in England, and I have no idea really what I know that there was a big war, well, not war, but troubles, and I don't really know much about what happened afterwards. And I know from living in another country that in Germany, of all places, that these things come with stories. These things come with a lot of things that happened afterwards, things that happened during, baggage that carry on. So I would really like to know what was the first thing that you knew about the troubles in your life?
It's a tough one because the Troubles is something that's kind of avoided in schools. It's obviously a very important topic for everyone living in this country, and you do hear about it. But I think part of the issue is that you do kind of hear about it from your own family members, which naturally is going to result in a lot of people having very biased opinions. In this country, you kind of are one side or the other. You're either an Irish Republican or you're a British Unionist. There is a growing third party now. They're sort of neutral in the middle, but generally speaking, you're one or the other. So if you do ask about the Troubles, or if you hear about the Troubles from your family, you are going to get one side of it. You're not really going to hear the other side. And I think that, you know, I mean, I remember going back to whenever I was very young. It was kind of always a scary topic that no one ever really wanted to speak about because, it was catastrophic. And it's not like something from ancient history. It's not like the American Civil War. This is like, this is something that lasted for years and years that our parents would have lived through, like my parents. So it's recent history, and obviously it's been a significant event in our history, and stemming from the troubles is a lot of things that sort of apply to our daily lives even nowadays. So it's a really important part of history, but you do kind of you don't hear much about it from school or from community leader. It's kind of left to your families. It's kind of left to your parents, which has its pros and its cons.
I guess that's somewhat because you can't be seen as showing bias.
That's
And
it. Yeah, I mean, there was no laws against talking about the troubles in schools and things, but I mean, teachers are petrified about being accused or seeming like they're sort of trying to bias children or give children a skewed side of history. So it really is. You're right. It's just avoided through fear of any potential biases.
yeah, um, it's fascinating. I mean, no, having been part of this community since it was started, I know I know what how difficult it is to walk the line of of being unbiased because there's going to be people that are going to see bias in whatever you do. So I can very much understand in a situation where people's lives were lost that you just don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, and I think it's different from a sort of foreign war where yes, there are lives lost, but they're very detached from reality. But I mean, for a lot of young people and a lot of even the adults and things, it's their own dads, it's their own uncles that got maybe bombed or shot back during the Troubles. So it's still a very sensitive topic for a lot of people.
Do you mind me asking, who was there anybody in your family, immediate family or near family?
Not that I know of. My dad would have been. He would have been obviously. He would have been a loyalist. And I suppose we'll get into what those terms and stuff mean soon. But um, he would have been very much interested in the Troubles, and he would have been obviously alive at the time. He'd have been a young man, and he'd have done anything for his community. So I was very lucky. I don't have any immediate family members that I know of anyway that were killed or injured in any significant way. But it's definitely not to say that my family had nothing to do with it or they didn't experience it. My aunties and my uncles will tell me stories about them coming home from school, them having to be sent home from school early, and they have to walk a long, long way because they couldn't get the bus because there was a bomb threat. Genuine, real bomb threats on their school buses or on their way home from school, and they've got to take detours. So no one
It's
was
terrible.
killed, but we still do have stories. Still do have stories.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's got to impact you.
Yeah, and I
Uh,
think people always kind of wonder why Northern Ireland is such a divided country, and it is. You've got two. They're not really. Generally, when you look at places like America and stuff, and you look at struggles like civil rights and that kind of thing, it generally comes from a minority group. So you've got black people or gay people or women. Well, women not weren't really a minority group, but you get the kind of picture. It usually comes from a smaller group of people who feel that they're being treated unjustly. In Northern Ireland, the situation is sort of worse in ways because the two main sections of the community are quite large. You don't have a small minority. You've got quite a large number of people on both sides of the fence, um, and they have fundamentally, opposing viewpoints about the world. Half of the people kind of think Northern Ireland should be a united Ireland with the Republic, and then the other half kind of think Northern Ireland should remain in the United Kingdom. And those are two fundamentally opposed viewpoints about the constitutional status of the country. So there's been a lot of tension within the communities and things, like your uncle being shot or your auntie having to walk home from school because there was a bomb threat from the other side. And a lot of time from your own side as well. It's very sensitive and it's very personal to a lot of people.
yeah, I can imagine. Was there a particular event that sort of made the troubles sort of really hit home to you as you were growing up throughout your life?
I think it's hard to kind of think of one situation or one instance that really kind of got me interested because, you know, there's just so many stories from so many different people. I remember people in school telling me about, their uncles had to carry bombs out of bars to stop people from dying, and people who one of my closest friends, he was telling me that his granddad was shot by the British Army. So, on both sides of the fence there are a lot of there's a lot of history there, and there's a lot of personal investment in it for people. And we have tried to move on, but I don't know. I think the scars of the past are still there, and we're only kind of starting to get over it.
Crikey. Yeah. Okay. I mean, yeah. In It does sound like it's just a constant background noise that makes things difficult.
It is, and it's a weird kind of social dynamic too, especially among young people, because we've kind of reached a point now where people don't hate each other on the basis of their religion or their political persuasions or whatever. It's not really like that anymore. But you still do get that weariness around people from what we would kind of call the other side, and it's the same on both sides. We're all similar here in how we treat each other. If I was to bring someone, let's say, out with me and my mates, and they were a Catholic, it's not like they'll be treated worse, but everyone will kind of know and keep in mind you're talking to a Catholic person, and it'd be the same thing if it was the other way around. If I was out with Catholic friends or whatever, Republican friends, you would kind of be introduced before you get there as, oh, by the way, he's a Protestant or he's a Catholic or he's a Unionist or whatever.
And you
So
can't just be anonymous.
you can, but it's kind of like there's kind of a joke in this country about you know, people would come up, and there is areas where you will be asked to state your religion. Like there's places I couldn't go. There's places I couldn't go with certain football tops on, or certain badges or whatever. There's actually places where you would be attacked for going into the wrong area. So it's a weird kind of social thing where if you're dead on with other people, if you're sort of kind, and if you're I don't know what the normal, we just call it dead on. It just means like sound. You're cool with other people. You're going to be treated similarly. But when you get that like mob mentality, when a Protestant walks into a group of Catholics, there's definitely like a, I don't know, you are the enemy, and we are the good guys, if you get me. It's a weird kind of, it's just something that's constantly in your mind, and you've constantly to think about when meeting new people or going into new areas. You do kind of have to keep that in mind.
So I've got a couple of questions following that. Protestant Catholic, is that the divide? Or because I read recently that it's not so so definite these days. It's
No,
not.
you'd be absolutely right. It's not really as definite as that anymore. I think in recent years, I mean, I've seen among my peers, people are becoming less and less religious, full stop. So, I mean, no one really is a Protestant or a Catholic anymore, not in the traditional sense anyway. It is, those terms are kind of used interchangeably with unionist and nationalist, or loyalist
Okay.
and republican, because generally Catholics are going to be, in support of a united Ireland. Not all of the time, and increasingly more so, you're getting people sort of bleed from both groups into the other. But generally speaking, a Republican's going to be a Catholic, and a Unionist is going to be a Protestant. It's
Okay.
not really where the divide lines anymore, but it's quick little terms that you can use to kind of categorize people, which we're all guilty of. But yeah, you're right. If you were to ask as someone who would be quite a staunch Unionist or loyalist, are you a Protestant? They'll tell you yes, but they might not believe in God. They might not be very religious at all. They might be atheists, so they're not really Protestant or Catholic. So yeah, you'd be right about that. It is more of a political divide than a religious one now.
Yeah. And going on from that, do you have friends on both sides? And if and if yes, then how does that work?
It's it's a weird one. I don't have any issues with people from the other side of the community, but because of the way Northern Ireland is, areas, estates, just housing areas, they're generally one side or the other. So the place that I live, pretty much everyone, with the exception of very few, is going to be from my sort of political religious background, and everyone in nearby areas are going to be the same. So most of my friends would be from a similar background to myself. It's not because I'm bigoted or don't want to speak to anyone from the other side. It's just really, if you're in a loyalist area, most of the people that you're going to be near and be able to spend time with are going to be loyalists. So I don't have any issue with people from the other side, but no, I wouldn't really associate with them much.
And that goes for schools as well.
Yeah, well, more and more now, I think they're advocating for integrated education, which is where everyone is kind of taught in the same building, the same stuff. But the school I went to was a state school, and it was a controlled school, and I'm not sure if it officially was a Protestant school, but pretty much everyone going there would have been a Protestant. I mean, Catholics wouldn't have went to there, and there'd be schools as well that Protestants just wouldn't think of going. There's a few schools with like St Mary's or St Joseph's, they're Catholic schools, so we do have a lot of segregation within our education system, but we're making moves to sort of combat that. So there's more and more schools now becoming integrated, and the communities are starting to vote for their schools to become integrated. So yes, segregation still does exist within schools, and I think we're on the right path to kind of solving that kind of issue.
That's great. That's good to hear. I mean, because this did happen a long time ago, and it's good to hear that things are moving forward in some ways. Um,
They were
they
up
were.
until
Let's move on
recently.
to that a little bit later.
Yeah.
um,
um,
so yeah, so you do have you do know people on the other side, but you're not necessarily able to hang out with them and get
Yeah,
to
on
know
on
them.
like a on a personal level, I wouldn't really be able to hang out with them. I've spoke to a lot of politicians from both sides, so I'd be quite friendly with people, politicians that represent the other side. I would speak to them quite often. I certainly wouldn't be someone who's never seen a Catholic or never seen a nationalist. I do speak to the people from both sides of the community, but just in my own personal life, when I'm going out to relax, yeah, most of the people that I would sort of spend my time with would be loyalist unionist people.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, it's sad that that's still the case, but I mean, I can understand the situation. It's difficult.
It is,
So
yeah.
the next one I wanted to ask, um, how so if you don't necessarily if the line doesn't necessarily go down with religion, and it doesn't necessarily go with what your family brought you up to be to believe politically, then how do people decide on their stance on being loyalist or unionist?
Well, I think it's really interesting how it sort of works over here. So, like I said, most areas will be, I mean, they're not officially designated nationalist or Republican or Unionist areas, but they kind of are. It's an unwritten rule. So when you're growing up and you're very young, you'll go out into your street and you'll see Union Jacks flying along all of the sort of houses, and you'll see red, white, and blue bunting across the lampposts. And so it's just kind of always part of who you are. It's always part of your culture. And as you get older, you kind of start to learn that there is a large group of other people out there. And I think the issue is, you know, and the media I think play a large part in portraying this, but it certainly looks like a lot of young people that if they're from one background, they're constantly seeing in the news that this big other group of people are constantly kind of aiming for and seeking for and fighting for um, everything to be, well, this is the perception, I'm not saying this is the case, but everything to be taken away from you. So really what I'm talking about is Republicans, Sinn Féin, the IRA, they want to come into your streets and take your Union Jacks down and paint over the curbs along the road, because a load of areas would have those painted certain colours as well. So from a young age, you're kind of taught this is who you are, and there's this big group of people out there who are trying to take that away from you. And I think that plays a big role in why we are still, because yes, we have made progress, but we are still quite divided as a people, and I think that things like that are the reason why.
Yeah, I think I've seen a little bit of that. The, there seems to be a lot of comparing the unionist side of things to terrorists,
Yeah,
um, and I think that's it's kind of moving a subject. When you get to that point, you're moving past the point that you are willing to talk. You're moving past the point that you're going to get anything useful out of the other side.
well, this is exactly the issue, and this is kind of why we've reached the point that we're at now. Unionists feel that they have engaged with the political process. They feel that they have sort of engaged in the peace process. The Good Friday Agreement came in 1998, and the whole point of it was kind of to put an end to the Troubles finally, decommission the paramilitaries who still exist, and just kind of bring the country to a sort of peaceful resolution. And the principle of the Good Friday Agreement, fundamentally, what Unionists believe it was, is that it was an agreement that Northern Ireland would remain entirely within the United Kingdom until the government, the Secretary of State, believes that a majority of the people of Northern Ireland would rather join a united Ireland. So that was kind of the principle of it. Northern Ireland will remain British entirely until a majority of the people demonstrate a will otherwise. And I think the issue in recent times is that Unionists feel they have engaged with this peace process, and regardless of whether or not a majority of the people in Northern Ireland have articulated a desire to join a united Ireland, we have been moving towards that point anyway. So, there was a number of years ago, there were Union Jacks were taken down from government buildings. They were told because Northern Ireland is sort of a hybrid state, Union Jacks shouldn't be able to fly. Now, they were able to come to a compromise that it would fly, I think, 190 days of the year, half of the year anyway. And that kind of annoyed Unionists, because their point was, the Good Friday Agreement sets out that we are entirely part of the United Kingdom as a no lesser partner, until the majority of the people demonstrate a will otherwise, and that hasn't happened yet. And yet we have continued to see a number of what loyalists perceived to be attacks on our position within the United Kingdom, and so that is kind of why I think tensions are rising up again, and communities are more divided than ever.
So, do you mind me asking, where do you think most of the tension has come from in recent times?
It really has been a build-up of a number of, like I said, perceived Republican victories. So we had the flags being taken down from government buildings, and unionists felt that that was an attack on their identity. We are a part of the United Kingdom. Why shouldn't we be able to fly our flag above buildings? And then after that, that was a number of years ago. We also had the Irish Language Act that was being floated about. So there were kind of pushing for an Irish Language Act. We've started to see it kind of be advocated for again recently, but pretty much unionists were under the impression that Irish speakers, Sinn Féin and Republicans from down south, what they wanted was legislation put in place to protect their language, despite the fact that very few of them speak it. Now, that's not something that I feel particularly strongly about. Personally, I have no issues with listening and sort of coming to a logical decision on such an Irish Language Act, but there was certainly a feeling among loyalist communities that, they've already had our flags taken down. There's always protests whenever we try and have our band parades from Republican sort of people. They say they don't want you to walk past chapels, and we don't want you to walk past this and this area. And, we've just had a number of years of Republicans making demands and, the government conceding to those demands. And unionism hasn't really made any big demands itself.
Did those things ever make any difference, though?
It's more, I think it's more a feeling of injustice. It's a feeling that we aren't as respected as half of the community. It's a feeling that the principles of the Good Friday Agreement are being breached. And it kind of paints out the picture that this agreement was kind of just like a sticking plaster. So they never really cared if the conflict was solved or not. All they wanted was to stop the killings and the bombings. And unionists are frustrated because they engaged with that process in good faith, under the impression that Northern Ireland would remain British until there was a democratic will otherwise, and that hasn't happened. There's been a number of other things. The Bobby Story funeral was probably one of the most recent ones. So it was where senior members of Sinn Féin participated in a large scale funeral. I think there was thousands of people there. During a time in which the very same people had restrictions on the number of people that could attend a funeral. So they outright broke the law. There was only 30 people are allowed to a funeral. And, we've all been following these rules. People have sacrificed, getting to see their final loved ones sent off or buried. And then they see the very people that make these rules go out and breach these restrictions. And then the police I don't know what the police had recommended, but the prosecution service anyway had decided not to pursue charges. So that was just another blow to the unionist community, because they felt, that demonstrated evidence of a two-tiered policing system, which is something else that unionists have felt has existed for a time now. So that would be sort of, there's a difference in the response to nationalist criminality and loyalist criminality. There's a perceived difference in how police respond to Republicans and unionists. And unionists feel that, all of this added up has just reached a point where it's too much. And now we're at a point with the Northern Ireland Protocol where unionists feel that the Northern Ireland Protocol will be fundamentally damaging to our position within the United Kingdom, and it will, at its core, it will help further the cause for a United Ireland, which we deem to be unconstitutional and against the law and unlawful, because that vote, that referendum that was promised in the Good Friday Agreement hasn't been reached, and so there really is no, there's no law, there's no outlet, there's no framework that allows the British government to differentiate Northern Ireland from the rest of the United Kingdom.
I mean, I would really like to have a unionist on here as well, because I think that there's probably, from what you're saying to me, there's probably lots of things that you don't know about how they feel and how they've been brought up, and about their side of the story.
Yeah,
and
well,
I have no doubt that there is that side. Is there anything that you think is missed by the loyalist community that the unionists?
Well, I think just to sort of, because I think unionists and loyalists are generally on the same side, so there's not much of a difference between a unionist and a loyalist. Unionism kind of refers to the political well, in my opinion anyway, unionism refers to the political ideology that Northern Ireland should remain part of the United Kingdom. So
Okay.
unionism is something that can be, there can be Catholic unionists, there can be well, there can't be Republican unionists, there can be Catholic unionists, there can be unionists from anywhere. But
Okay.
loyalism refers much more to like the culture. So that is the flags on the streets, that is the lampposts with the bunting around it, the red, white, and blue, the band parades.
Okay, so it's more
So
Republicans and loyalists, or Republicans and unionists.
So yeah, loyalists is kind of perceived as a more hardline unionist, and unionist is sort of seen as a softer thing. So unionist would be like into Republicans, and then loyalist would be very much like Irish nationalists. So yeah, we were on the same side as loyalists and unionists. They're kind of together. They have the same goals and beliefs. Then the other side would be the nationalist Republican side, which I feel I've done a decent job at engaging with and trying to understand where they're come from. And it's why, I do listen to things like the requests for an Irish Language Act. And I say, do you know what? I think that's a reasonable request. Let's work together to come up with something that we can both be happy with.
Yeah, yeah. It's a shame because living in Germany, I do see that the English language is actually being taken on rather than doing a new word in German when something new happens, it needs a word. They're just taking the English word
Yeah.
because, and this is happening all over the world in all sorts of different cultures and languages. Even the French, who had, like, they did have a department dedicated to protecting the French language for a long, long
Yep.
time. I think it's been, they've given up now, but somewhat. But the sentiment, I think, is still there. They don't want to have their language overridden by English.
Yeah, and I think that
Um,
that's a totally legitimate sort of concern. I mean, you look at Wales, they have provisions in place for the Welsh language. They have legislation in place to protect it. Scottish has legislation in place to protect Gaelic.
it's just
So,
a shame that this was seen in a negative way by your side, by the loyalists and by the loyalists and the unionists.
I would
Um,
agree, but I think at the same time, you have to understand that a lot of people feel that we have given a lot already and haven't gotten much back from it. So for a
that's
lot of
fair
people,
enough.
it's more the principle of, well, if we give you an Irish Language Act, what are you going to ask for next? Now, again, I
It's
disagree with that
bartering.
sort of viewpoint altogether. I think let's just kind of look at the situation and approach it logically, regardless of whether it's going to benefit unionists or Republicans. Let's just approach this as if we would any other piece of legislation. Look at the benefits, look at the costs, and come to a determination. But yeah, there's certainly a feeling that, if we were to give them an Irish Language Act, and if we were to agree to it, then they would certainly just ask for more, and we'd continue to get nothing in return. So I think after all of these perceived Republican victories, unionists and loyalists have, and especially with the introduction of the Northern Irish Protocol, I think unionists and loyalists have kind of just said, you know what it is, we've given enough, we've got some demands of our own, and we want them listened to and respected.
Yeah. What sort of things are they? What sort of things would you like? Would your side like respected?
Well, the annoying thing for me is that, you know, we don't have real political goals within unionism, and it's hard to get people energized because our whole kind of cause, our whole kind of purpose is to protect the status quo, is to protect our position within the union, which we're already part of.
Hmm.
So I think, Republicans have had a much easier time getting young people involved to fight their cause because what they're aiming for is something tangible. It's we want to fight for a change in the constitutional status of Northern Ireland to create a united Ireland so that the whole island is sort of united. That's a goal. You're fighting for change. For us, it's been very difficult to get young people interested and young people involved because you're basically saying to them, we want you to fight for everything to remain exactly the same. And the issue with that is no one's really happy with things exactly the same. We're not happy with how things are at the minute. So one of my criticisms of unionism and loyalism would be that we don't really have many political goals. And whenever, Republicans ask for things like an Irish Language Act, our response is always, well, if you're getting one of them, we want an Ulster Scots Language Act, even though we don't really speak Ulster. There's pretty much no one that speaks Ulster Scots in Northern Ireland.
I've
So,
never even
that's
heard of
not
that
even
language.
something. Yeah, exactly. It's a very, it's, I think it's still spoken in Scotland, but it's definitely not really spoken over here much. People might know a few words, but it's certainly not anything that people would talk as their first language. So to me, that's kind of just saying, well, if you want something, we want the same thing, regardless of whether or not it's actually going to benefit us or not. I'd rather just approach it kind of sensibly and say, right, this is what you want. Here are our concerns with it. Let's kind of iron them out together.
So this is I'm kind of getting the impression that I don't know anywhere near enough on this, but I think it's a really complicated topic for someone that's not been a part of it.
It is
But
a very complicated topic, but it's good to kind of ask questions because it just means, if you see something in the news, you might, you'll be able to relate it to something. You'll kind of know roughly what they're talking about. And
yeah,
I think I would encourage you to listen to both sides, because even though I'm coming from my point of view, I do totally understand and respect where a lot of Republicans are coming from as well, So despite the fact that I disagree, I think you're right. It is important to kind of get both sides of the story. But I suppose what it boils down to is for decades now, we've had two large groups of people who have fundamentally opposed goals and beliefs and opinions on how Northern Ireland should be viewed in a world lens. And those people are willing to quite literally go out and fight in order to achieve what it is that they want to. So, yeah, there is an awful lot of conflict and there is an awful lot of tensions between us. But what I would say to people is, can you really blame us in a way? I certainly wish that it wasn't so hostile, and I certainly wish that it wasn't so aggressive and dangerous and based on force. I wish that we could have intelligent discussions about practical solutions to issues that real people have. But unfortunately, there certainly is a perception that if we don't have our backs straight and if we don't really sort of take a hardline approach, then we are going to lose everything that's important to us.
Okay. So I guess this is an easy question. My last question. Well, possibly my last question. We'll see. Because you've basically said that the goal for the loyalist and unionist side is simply to stay in the union.
Pretty
But
much.
but you've also have said that there have been things that we all know that there's been some troubles recently, not on the scale of the troubles, but
Yep.
it's been quite significant. I guess I should probably ask you before I ask you my last question. Do you want to tell us about your experience in these recent events? Because I'm not sure everybody listening here will realise, but you were actually arrested
Yep.
and then released without charge in the
Yeah.
recent troubles.
Yeah, so it was on Good Friday, believe it or not. There was trouble. It was kind of the first one of the riots. There was trouble that kicked off down at a place called Sandy Row. So it would be quite a loyalist area. It would be filled with loyalist people. Union Jacks on the lampposts and stuff. And I was just kind of passing. It's right beside our city centre. So I was passing and I saw a really large police presence. And I don't know if you've ever been to Northern Ireland, but we would see armoured jeeps and stuff down the street, helicopters. Our police are quite militarised. Our police stations have big barbed wire brick walls around them, so the police are very militarised over here. And I had saw a line of big police armoured vans, and just assumed it was a bomb threat, because bomb threats still do happen. There's been my auntie and things recently have been moved out of her home because there's a suspicious object that's been found on the railway tracks. So bomb threats and stuff, it's still things that happen. So I went over to see what was going on, and I then noticed the disorder. So there was about 300 people there, but I think there was only 20 to 30 people actually engaged in rioting, and they had just completely destroyed the place. So they were throwing bricks, pushing bins into police officers. The police were there in their full sort of riot gear. It wasn't just a wee bit. It wasn't just a load of children kicking off a bit of trouble. It was a proper conflict. And I've noticed that one of the people that was there, putting themselves into dangerous positions. was a young fellow that I know and I care about quite a lot. And I sort of went over to him. I originally tried to text his mum and then phone his brother, but it was clear like this kid is in danger here. So I'd went over to him and I'd kind of said, look, I understand that this is exciting, and it is exciting. You know, a riot is exciting, conflict is exciting. It's not fun, and I don't think it's good, but it certainly is exciting, and especially for kids. So I'd said to him, look, stand here and watch with me. I won't even stand with you if you don't want me to, but please just don't get yourself into trouble. And he did. He sort of stopped, and he was more sensible about where he was and what he was doing. But as the night went on, I think he got a bit too close to the line of police with riot shields and things. And at various points throughout the night, they'd kind of done this thing where they'd signalled their sirens and then literally the police were being quite brutal as well. I mean, the police and all this adds to the perception that we're living in a two-tiered policing system. So after all that, there was calls for the chief constable to resign and things. So it's quite serious. But I'd noticed that they were about to make one of their advances, and the wee fellow that I was kind of there looking after, he hadn't moved. He was still standing down by the front, and I just knew this dude is going to get himself arrested here. So I'd ran back. He had ran into a little side street, and I just followed him. I didn't want him to be by himself. He's young. He's only 13, and that's where we were all arrested. Now, I hadn't done anything wrong, and I told him that. I have maintained my innocence throughout the whole thing. From literally when I was detained, all throughout the 20 hours that I was held in custody, and even still, we're pursuing civil action against the police and filing an ombudsman complaint. So it was just completely unlawful. Um, and I suspect that I wasn't the only one treated unlawfully as well. But that kind of shows you the two sides to it. So, I've condemned the rioters. I've said that they shouldn't have been there and they shouldn't have been rioting, and I would stand by that. But at the same time, I think the police took the position that they wanted to fight fire with fire, and it didn't work out very well, and it kind of escalated into, I'm sure you've seen the news reports of the buses being hijacked and burnt out and exploded and all that. So it did get a bit crazy and out of hand. But thankfully, after Prince Philip died, things kind of quietened down a wee bit, and I think there's still protests every day all around the country, but in terms of the violent conflict, it kind of hasn't kicked off again.
Okay, so I'm gonna sound different right now. I had to switch my microphone because I ran out of battery. But you can still hear me, can you?
Yep.
Yeah, awesome. So I guess my last question before we ask our community for some more questions. Where do you hope to see the situation in Northern Ireland in 5 or 10 years' time?
So from from I was arrested, I came to, I got a lot of media attention. Just shortly after I was arrested and then released. But then the other kind of week there, I was testifying at the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee at Westminster, and some comments that I had made had kicked off a social media frenzy because I was actually there speaking as a member of the LCC, which is it's called the Loyalist Communities Council, and it's basically just an organisation that represents people from all backgrounds within the Loyalist community. And I mean, I'll just put it bluntly with you that they do have representatives there from various paramilitary organisations. So, there was a lot of crap that kind of kicked off from that. People weren't too happy. But I think the point that we were trying to make there, and the point that I would still kind of stand by, is that this is an incredibly volatile situation. And what we really don't want to see is the UK government just ignore the unionist and loyalist community and kind of shove off our demands and put us to the side because it will mean that we will have to continue with the protests and potentially look at strikes and things. And the last thing we want is to make our place look rubbish or whatever, and the last thing that we want is to annoy the British government. At the end of the day, we want to be part of Britain. We want to be part of the United Kingdom. But, at the same time, we also do want our views respected. So, in terms of the next 5 and 10 years, it really depends. It depends on whether or not the Unionist and Loyalist community is given the respect that we feel it's deserved. And it also depends on whether or not the government listens to the demands with regards to the Northern Ireland Protocol, because the Northern Ireland Protocol really is kind of a red line for us. It really does damage our position within the United Kingdom constitutionally. And sort of fundamentally we believe that the legislation is unlawful. So we would be seeking for an alternative. Ideally, in 5 to 10 years, I've had talks with various political parties. Hopefully, I myself will be in a position to kind of try and help the situation within our communities, because what you also have to understand, this is all quite political and philosophical and ideological, but there are also real roots on the ground issues that we feel need addressed as well. So those are the kind of things that I would like to focus on too. Protestant working class boys are some of the lowest achievers in our education system. They are the lowest achieving group in our education system, even factoring in people coming from different countries and things. So I think really where we want to be in 5 to 10 years is a Northern Ireland that's still within the United Kingdom and it's flourishing economically, socially. We're able to help the members of our community that right now are struggling. We have record levels of poverty and things, and we could be doing a lot better. And hopefully our politicians will kind of wind their necks in, um, kind of start taking a real leadership role, and stop being so greedy and short sighted. And kind of take a real leadership role, give ourselves real political goals for unionism and roadmaps on how to achieve them, so that we can get away from all of this hating each other and complaining and whining and really just work together and focus on creating a Northern Ireland that works for everybody.
I mean, that sounds good. I mean, bringing people together, I think it's so difficult at the moment in all countries, the US, the UK, all of the UK. It's not just Northern Ireland, um, and um, and there are other countries as well. It's a tough one. It's not
Yeah, it is.
easy
I mean, even
to find a solution.
it is, and it doesn't help with other countries as well, because what you'll find, obviously there's a situation going on in Israel and Palestine at the minute. Now, I'm not going to pretend to know enough about Middle Eastern politics to take a side on that, but what we saw was Republicans, Sinn Féin, and things started coming out in support of Palestine. Um, and then the unionist loyalist community started coming out in support of Israel. And I don't doubt that there are some people who genuinely care about the conflict going on in the Middle East. Of course there are, but I think too a lot of it is we're just going to back this side because our enemies are kind of backing the other side. So it's an interesting situation where even whenever things kind of simmer down and calm down in Northern Ireland, if something kicks off somewhere else, you know, the Republicans will be straight in to sponsor one side and loyalists will be straight in to sponsor the other. So even though the conflict has nothing to do with us, it's nowhere near us. We're virtually, it unaffects us in every way. It's nothing to do with us whatsoever. You'll still find that people will argue and fight over it here.
That's fascinating. I mean, that's really, really, really fascinating because I mean, these things are happening on the other side of the world. They have nothing to do with Ireland. I don't know.
It's fascinating, yeah. It's almost school like if you remember in school, you kind of picked one thing just because someone picked the other thing, and you didn't want to copy them. And it's fascinating to see that we're still at a point in this country, 20, 20 more than 20 years after the Good Friday Agreement was signed, where we're still kind of in this childhood politics type thing where you're just bitterly arguing over silly little things that don't really matter, just for the sake of sticking it to the people that you don't like. It really is unfortunate, but hopefully we can change that. In the next few years, whether that be 5 or 10 or 50 if it needs to be. We're moving in the right direction, and I think that's what matters.
Well, I do hope that that does happen for everybody involved. It's been going on long enough. It's a difficult. Um, it, we've all grown up knowing about conflict, not necessarily conflict, but clashes of personality, clashes of these political ideals in Northern Ireland, and we all knew that it was there.
Yeah.
It's just a pity that it's come back. It's got worse, but maybe it just needs to get worse before it can start getting better again. So let's hope that that's the case.
I definitely hope so, because I mean the last thing any of us want is a return to a sort of violent political sphere. You know, none of us want anyone to be injured or hurt or anything like that. So ideally, we're going to be able to sort all this out through peaceful political discourse.
That's great. Okay, so I've asked all my questions. I was wondering if there was any questions that we have in the chat. Um,
Well, I know that Strategist has a question, so I might invite them to speak if that's all right. And then we have a couple of other questions, and people can post more questions if they want. So I will invite Strategist because I know they have a question.
I can't really hear you, Paragon. Do you want to read out the first question?
Oh, I think he's letting the guy speak.
Ah, right. Okay, cool. these were actually issues that with Brexit too. There were difficulties with the pensions of people in living in Europe that they were on national insurance. They paid all their taxes, and they'd been living quite often in Spain in their house, and there was a lot of there was and still is a lot of uncertainty around the whole thing. Who's going to pay that pension? And I'm still not entirely sure that it's been resolved. But yeah, I'm an expat, and the whole situation with expats has been so complicated. It's not unlike what you're talking about there. So I said this earlier, but there is a tendency to label the nationalist Republicans as terrorists, and they're not all terrorists. Yeah. But whether that is the case or not, they're not committing acts of terrorism. Okay. Okay. So I just wanted to clarify. The reason I'm asking this is not because I don't, as you know, I don't know the situation, but I want to I want to sort of push back on it to ensure that to make it clear that we don't. I just wanted to make it sure that we're not saying that everybody's on one side or the other, because that's people that might listen to this if it gets published, which I hope it will. They will. They need to understand that there are good people on both sides. There are bad people on both sides. And to move forward, it's not about punishment. It's not. Yeah. Okay. And is that a feeling that is also equalled within the Republican side? They are under British rule. They are under a majority they're under a majority government, Irish government, um, on the Unionist loyalist side. Is there an equivalent feeling on that side? Yeah. Yeah, I don't really know where to go from there because it's yeah. Thanks for that clarification. I just wanted to get that out. So, have we got any more questions in the chat? So going along those lines, I think that's a really good question, by the way, whoever put that one forward. I think I'd like to know what, if Scotland were to leave the Union, what is the definition of Britain? Like, is it then England and Wales with Northern Ireland, or is Britain? Does Scotland and Northern Ireland feel like Britain too? And with Scotland wanting to rejoin the EU, how would that affect the political situation? I mean, what I mean is, and I 100% appreciate that. But if Britain is to start dividing, which could well happen, we all know that it could happen because there's so much division in everybody's political opinions at the moment. I hope they will, because I think that it's something that's been on the fence for a while. That's my personal opinion. It's not the opinion of anybody in particular. But my point is, if Scotland's not in Britain, then Britain is not what it used to be. It's not going to be the same again. And doesn't exist anymore. I guess that on the flip side of that, the Republican side doesn't necessarily respect the British, the rest of the British vote in the same way. Is that the case, do you think? It's hard to see how to move forward from that, to be honest, with that in mind. I mean, that's kind of it's kind of a part of the whole Brexit deal, to be honest. There is there are checks to see that there is equivalence in law. Um, Okay, so I think I want to call this sometime soon because it's getting quite late. Shall we have one more question? And have we? Is there a question that anybody would particularly like? Do you want to put a thumbs up on the question in the chat? Okay, so I'll read this one out. We've got another thumbs up. Okay, maybe we'll have two questions. These are equal. But anyway, the first one, first come first serve. Oh goodness, everybody's putting thumbs up on. Thumbs up don't count if they're on your own. Yes, that means there's only one. Right. So Ollie is a high school student, and he's finding very it's fascinating to listen to someone who's actually experienced this. He watched a documentary called Petrol Bombs and Peace, Welcome to Belfast. Have you seen it? Yeah, he's asking, would you see if this is a fair assessment? Yeah, that's awesome. I'm like, this has been a fantastic experience listening to speaking with you. I'm really feel very lucky that we've managed to get you on and been able to do this in our community because it's been great. I think there'll be a fair few of us trying to have a look at that at some point soon. So yeah, thank you. That's really cool. Okay, so thank you everybody for coming. If you like this as a concept, then please let us know. Just mention in the TLDR Ask chat, and hopefully we're going to send this recording off to the team and see what they think. So perhaps it's going to be on our YouTube channel, perhaps it's not. We'll see. But in the meantime, I'm really grateful. I feel I'm really grateful that we had this opportunity, and I start looking at all the comments that have been popping up in the TLDR's chat. It's been really good. So I'm very pleased. All right, thank you everyone, and see you next time. Cheers. Bye.